There is a moment, quiet, unremarkable from the outside, that some people will recognize immediately. You are holding your phone, you have typed something, maybe a caption, maybe a thought you wanted to share. You have done this hundreds of times before. Your thumb hovers over the button, and then nothing. Not nothing like laziness, not nothing like forgetting, nothing like a door you used to walk through without thinking, that you are now standing in front of, and for the first time, you are asking yourself why you were ever going through it. The words don't feel wrong. The photo isn't bad. But something beneath all of it, something in the part of you that has been quietly changing for longer than you've admitted, simply isn't interested anymore. The hunger that used to pull you toward posting has gone somewhere else, and in its place is a stillness you don't yet have a name for. You close the app, you put the phone down, and for a moment the silence feels like the most honest thing you have felt in years. If that moment is familiar, you are not antisocial, you are not depressed, you have not failed at the modern world. What you have done, quietly and without fully meaning to, is begin to outgrow a version of yourself that needed an audience to feel real. This is not a small thing. Most people never arrive here. Most people keep posting, keep scrolling, keep measuring their worth in the silent arithmetic of likes and reach, because the alternative, existing without external confirmation, feels to a nervous system that was never taught it was enough simply by being unbearable. You have begun to find it bearable, and that is the beginning of something profound. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist whose work transformed how we understand the inner life, gave us a concept that explains the entire architecture of social media in a single word: the persona. Jung described the persona as the mask we construct for the world. Not a lie exactly, more like a selected truth, the version of ourselves we choose to display in social situations to gain acceptance, manage impressions, and protect the more vulnerable, unformed parts of our identity from exposure. The word itself comes from the Latin for the masks worn by actors in ancient theatre. Every person develops a persona. It is a normal, necessary part of psychological development. The problem, Jung warned, is not that we build one. The problem is when we forget it is a mask. When we begin to believe the performance is the person. When we invest so much energy in maintaining the presented self that the real self, what Jung called the authentic inner life, the part that contains both our wounds and our deepest gifts, begins to quietly starve. Social media, in the precise language of Jungian psychology, is the most efficient persona construction machine ever invented. It gives the masked self an audience, a feedback loop, and a daily confirmation that the performance is working. Every notification is the crowd applauding. Every silence from the algorithm is the crowd going quiet. And the self that lives beneath the mask, the aching, searching, unresolved, extraordinary real self, learns to wait, learns to stay hidden, learns that it is perhaps not what people are here for. Let me tell you about a woman named Nadia. Nadia built her social media presence the way most people do, gradually, then completely. It started in her mid-20s when she was searching, as most people in their mid-20s are, for some evidence that her life was going in a direction worth going. She was warm and funny and perceptive, and these qualities translated well into the particular language of online spaces. People responded, the numbers grew, and for a while, it genuinely helped. The visibility gave her something she hadn't known she'd been missing, a sense of mattering to strangers, which felt at the time more comfortable than mattering to people who were close enough to see her clearly. Then she started therapy. Slowly, carefully, she began doing something she had never done with any consistency. She began telling the truth about how she felt. Not the curated truth, not the version designed to be relatable and slightly imperfect in ways that were still ultimately appealing. The real truth. The parts that were ugly and confused and didn't resolve neatly. And something began to shift. The things she posted started to feel like a performance she was delivering for someone she used to be. The carefully chosen images felt like evidence of a person who no longer quite existed. She would draft something, and midway through she would feel it, the faint nausea of inauthenticity, the sense that what she was offering to the world was not actually her, but the shadow puppet of her, shaped to fit what the space had taught her to be. She didn't announce a departure. She didn't write a post about not posting. She simply, slowly, then completely, stopped needing it. And in the silence that followed, she discovered something that startled her. She was still there. She had existed the entire time, without the confirmation. Nadia is not unusual. She is the pattern that appears, with striking consistency, in people who undergo genuine psychological growth. Research published in the Journal of Social and Clinical Psychology found that reducing social media use significantly decreased loneliness and depression. Not because social media had been actively harming people, but because the attention previously directed outward toward managing a public self became available to direct inward. The relationship with the self, starved by years of performance, began to receive what had always been intended for the audience, what neuroscience calls the default mode network. The brain's internal processing system, active during self-reflection, memory, and imagining the future, functions best in the absence of constant external stimulation. Social media, by design, colonizes precisely this network. The people who step back from it are not stepping back from life. They are stepping back into their own mind for the first time in years. But here's where it gets even more interesting, and it's the part that Jung spent the latter half of his life trying to help people understand. The impulse to perform, to build the persona, to seek the audience, to measure existence by its reflection in other people's eyes, does not come from vanity. It never did. It comes from something far older, far more painful, and far more understandable than that. Hold on to that. Because where it leads changes everything. Jung wrote that we do not become who we are by filling up. We become who we are by emptying out, by shedding the layers of adapted self that were constructed not from choice but from necessity. The persona, he believed, is almost always built over a wound. Specifically, the wound of conditional love. The child who learns that they are most welcomed, most safe, most visible when they perform in a certain way, when they are cheerful enough, impressive enough, agreeable enough, does not stop needing love. They simply learn to earn it. They learn that the raw, unedited version of themselves is a risk, that the real self, with all its confusion and fear and ordinary unglamorous humanity, is not what generates warmth. The curated self is. The performing self is. The self that knows how to present itself attractively to the available audience. And social media is simply the most sophisticated version of that childhood lesson ever built. Think about it. The same child who learned to modulate their emotional expression based on what their parents could receive grew up into an adult who learned to modulate their self-expression based on what the algorithm would reward. The feedback mechanism changed. The psychological structure beneath it did not. Jung gave a name to everything the persona suppresses. He called it the shadow. The shadow is not the dark self in the dramatic sense. It is simply everything you have decided, consciously or unconsciously, is not safe or welcome in the light. Your anger, your grief, your uncertainty, your ambivalence, your desire to disappear sometimes, your need to not have it figured out, your fear that you are not actually as put together as your feed suggests, every photograph you didn't post because it didn't look like enough, every feeling you didn't share because it seemed too much, every quiet Tuesday of genuine ordinariness that you didn't document because ordinariness, unadorned, felt somehow insufficient. That is your shadow, growing larger in direct proportion to the persona you are maintaining. And the shadow never disappears. It waits. It speaks in anxiety at 3 a.m. It speaks in the hollow feeling after the likes arrive and the happiness doesn't. It speaks in the strange grief of logging off and not knowing who you are without the feed. This is why people who undergo genuine psychological healing, who begin the slow, serious, often painful process of meeting themselves honestly, find that social media gradually loses its hold. Not because they have become superior to it, not because they have transcended the need for connection, but because the wound it was filling has begun painstakingly to close. When you no longer need the audience to confirm that you exist, you stop performing for it. When the likes were always filling the hole where unconditional love was missing, and you begin, slowly, imperfectly, for the first time, to offer yourself something resembling unconditional acceptance, the likes become beside the point. You do not leave social media. You simply outgrow the version of yourself who needed it in that particular way. And that is a completely different thing. Jung called the process of becoming whole individuation. It is, in his framework, the central task of a human life. The slow integration of the persona and the shadow, the false self and the real self, the performance and the truth, into a coherent, authentic, no longer divided person. It does not happen on a stage. It does not happen in front of an audience. It happens in the quiet, unglamorous, often uncomfortable interior work of sitting with yourself long enough to hear what you actually think, without immediately reaching for a way to share it. The silence that follows the departure from social media is not comfortable at first. Most people underestimate this. They imagine it as relief, and it is. But it is also disorienting. The scaffolding that held the identity upright is gone. The external confirmation that you are real, that your thoughts matter, that your day had value, withdrawn. And in that withdrawal, the self is left alone with itself in a way it may not have been since childhood. This is not failure. This is exactly the condition under which genuine growth becomes possible. Neuroplasticity, the brain's lifelong capacity to build new neural pathways, to literally rewire through new experience, tells us something important here. The neural circuits that encode the need for external validation, built over years of conditioning, do not dissolve immediately in the absence of their stimulus. They persist for a while, sending the old hunger, the old restlessness, the old reaching for the phone. But gradually, when they are not fed, they quieten. And the circuits that govern internal experience, self-reflection, genuine curiosity, the capacity to find meaning in private rather than performed moments, begin slowly to strengthen. The brain, deprived of the performance, relearns presence. Not overnight, not without a grieving period for the self that required the audience, not without moments of doubt about whether a life lived quietly, without documentation, counts in the way that photographed and captioned lives seem to, but gradually, honestly, in the particular way that things count when no one is watching, which is ultimately the only way they ever counted at all. And this is where the story opens, not ends, opens. If you are someone who has felt this, if you have found yourself standing at the edge of the feed and simply not wanting to step back in, I want you to understand what that silence is. It is not apathy. It is not failure. It is not a sign that something has gone wrong in you. It is the persona resting, and beneath it, patient and extraordinary and entirely real, is the self that was there before the performance began. You are allowed to exist without documenting the existence. You are allowed to think a thought and let it live only in you. You are allowed to have a beautiful moment that belongs entirely to you, not to the feed, not to the audience, not to the algorithm that was never, in any meaningful sense, your friend. The people who outgrow social media after deep healing are not antisocial. They are not cold. They are not withholding. They are people who have done something genuinely difficult, who have looked at the gap between who they were performing themselves to be and who they actually are, and chosen, quietly and without fanfare, to close it. That is not withdrawal. That is the most connected thing a person can do. Connected to the only person, it turns out, whose opinion of you was ever truly load-bearing. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are, not who you were applauded for being, not who the audience needed you to be, but the deep, unpolished shadow and all reality of yourself. You don't need a signal to start that. You don't need anyone's permission. The silence is already waiting, and it has been waiting for you for a very long time.